Hello, and welcome to Flipping the Classroom with Video Lectures. Today I'd like to chat with you about a first experience that I've had. My first experience was this semester, where in my Sensation and Perception class, which is an upper-level psychology class, I had pre-recorded all of my lectures and made them available to students through Blackboard so that they would watch them before coming into the classroom. Their typical responsibility was to watch the lecture, the video lecture in its entirety before coming into the classroom, and to help them with the lecture, I would make available also the PowerPoint lecture notes that I was talking about in the video lecture. And the student would view the video lecture while having the PowerPoint notes right in front of them, and they were encouraged to take down their own notes on whatever they found particularly interesting or maybe something that needed clarification, and they would bring that information into class. So they came to the classroom having watched the video and having looked through the PowerPoint lecture notes upon which the video had been based. What I'd like to share with you today are some of the many opportunities that I think I experienced and some of the positive features associated with giving video lectures. And in a little while, we'll also talk about some of the challenges, and then we'll conclude by talking about some of the learning opportunities associated with video lecturing. Okay, so here's what I think to be the very first and maybe most important advantage or opportunity associated with video lectures, and that is that they facilitate knowledge acquisition. If we think about the approximate 200,000 year history of the human animal, most of that history is characterized by learning and communication that was entirely verbal. It was only in the last maybe 4 to 10,000 years that humans began experimenting with the written word. So our evolutionary history in learning by some kind of verbal communication as opposed to purely written communication, that's a much older history for us that's perhaps more native or intuitive to us. So as a species, it can be advantageous to have the student prepare for class by listening rather than by reading. Ideally, they would be doing both for reasons that I'll talk about later, but you might imagine that the listening is a more intuitive mode of learning for most humans. In fact, if you think about yourself as a child, each of us as a child, and certainly our own students when they were young children, they first learned to listen, then they learned to speak, and then several years later they began to engage in this fairly difficult, relatively phylogenetically newer process of reading. So I think that the video lecture allows us to get back to a very native and intuitive form of learning. Importantly, there's another advantage as well, and that is related to this scheme that we often talk about in Introduction to Psychology. The scheme starts out with encoding some information from the environment. That is to say that we have neurons that are going to engage in transducing light information and sound information into something that might be stored in memory, and then perhaps at some later point in time we can retrieve a stored memory to solve a problem. And a recurring theme that I have in my classes is that I want all of my liberal arts students to become all-purpose problem solvers. And in order to do that, to solve any kind of a problem, they're going to need to pull some information out of storage and use that as a tool to solve some real-world problem. But they can only do that if something was stored in memory, and they can only store something in memory if it had been encoded early on. And what I love about video lecturing is we basically max out on the student's opportunity to encode. Let me see if I can give you an example as to why that's the case. Imagine that you were, instead of listening to a video lecture, you were listening to that same lecture live in the classroom. This is how I had given my lectures, typically in the classroom, through most of my first 10 or 11 years at Denison. Imagine, though, that as you're writing something down, you miss a particular word that I say. Or maybe I turn my back to the audience and I look now at the board, and the student doesn't hear a particular word or a particular phrase. The rest of the information in that sentence probably will be unintelligible. So no matter how good their storage might have been, if they haven't encoded what I said originally, it's not going to be a memory that is stored for later retrieval. Encoding is key, and by having a permanent record of what was said in the lecture available to our students 24/7, we can now maximize encoding, and we set the stage then for good storage and good retrieval. So this is actually very fundamental, and I think a very exciting benefit associated with video lectures. In addition, one of the things that I've noticed in the last several years here at Denison is that we have an increasingly diverse range of students, and I would like to create a more equitable learning landscape. Some of our students come to us from terrific high schools where the students have learned to read very, very well, and they've read a lot of very complicated information, and they're very well prepared for college-level reading. Other students of ours, particularly in recent years, have come from more challenging learning environments where they were not prepared so well by their high schools, and they find reading anything, whatever the content might be, at the college level to be a bit of a challenge. And that creates an unfair learning landscape. If we can circumvent that by getting back to a more natural form of communication using video lectures, then the complicated material becomes perhaps accessible to a student who is obviously very capable, but perhaps not so well prepared. Another manifestation of a lack of prepared or another cause, I should say, of having students be less well prepared is that sometimes students are coming to us with English not being their first language. And I think it's exciting to bring in students from all over the world whose first language is not English, but some of these folks really benefit by having a permanent record of what the professor is saying. And for these students, a native English speaker might be speaking at a rate that's a little bit fast when it's live in the classroom and they're trying to take it all down. If they can play it and replay it by way of a video lecture, then when they come into the classroom, even if English is not their first language, even if their reading skills are not where we would like them to have been because they were less well prepared in high school, we've leveled the playing field. The learning landscape is a little bit more equitable. And I think this is very much consistent with our desire to expand our access. We want students from all over the world and from many different kinds of backgrounds to have access to really the best of what a Denison education has to offer. I also think that maybe the most important feature associated with video lectures is this idea that it facilitates learning by doing. And to appreciate this point, I'll share with you just a brief observation that I had last summer when I was watching the Bluecoats, a drum and bugle corps, rehearsing here over the summer at Denison. The Bluecoats had just finished a practice run on one of their songs, and after they finished, the Bluecoats began to turn one to the next and engage in some chit-chat. And the conductor was trying to grab their attention, and the conductor was having some trouble doing that because there was too much chit-chat. And then the instructor yelled something along the lines of, "Bluecoats, you're really good, but you could be amazing if you could learn to rehearse more effectively. You could be amazing if you could rehearse more effectively." And I think what goes on in our classrooms is that we try to get our classrooms to be scenarios or environments where we're learning by doing, where we are rehearsing, and we want to rehearse effectively. And if the students come into the classroom prepared, they're ready to go, they know what the vocabulary is, they've already practiced or at least been exposed to some of the concepts, then we've set the stage for rehearsing very effectively, and we can now engage in learning by doing. We can take the vocabulary that we had, and we can use classroom time to engage in some novel problem solving. This is something that a MOOC can't do. A MOOC is a massive online open course that is very good at disseminating information. It is a type of video lecture, but there's no opportunity for rehearsal. And this is the major difference between a Denison classroom and a MOOC. We use our classroom time not just to disseminate information, which could have been done by a video lecture, and which we're doing here by video lecture, but we use our classroom time to rehearse. And we want to have very effective rehearsals, and video lectures set the stage for that. The students come in very well prepared. I think what I found to be the most surprising benefit was this, that the video lectures improve time management across the semester. And here I have this diagram to help remind me that at the beginning of every semester, here's the syllabus, and here's me. I'm right on track with the syllabus at the first moment of the first class of every semester. But sometimes, even by the end of the first class, the syllabus has gotten a little bit ahead of me. That is, maybe I wanted to talk about items A, B, and C, and I only got to A and B, but not to C. And I say to myself, oh, that's okay, I'll just catch up the next time. And across the semester, I have this growing deficit of information that I wanted to convey verbally to my students, but wasn't able to do so. What's great about the video lectures is that we get around this problem. The problem of having the syllabus out here, and me racing to catch up with the syllabus, particularly toward the end of the semester, and the students racing to stay with me as I'm trying to keep up with the syllabus. By having video lectures available in advance, I have for my students the opportunity to hear the material given in the verbal mode, even if we don't get to that in the classroom. We might have an in-class activity on A and B, and maybe we do or don't get to an in-class activity on C. But even if we don't get there, the students have had a verbal presentation on that, and it's available to them 24/7. So it's an effective time management tool. Lots of advantages here then for the students. I also want to share with you, though, I think an important advantage in video lecturing for us as faculty members, and a key component to faculty development. If you're willing to take that hard look in the mirror and see yourself, and it's a difficult thing to do. I have trouble looking at myself on video. I see that I make flubs spontaneously. I've already felt a couple of flubs in this video, and there will be a few more to come, I'm sure. You always ask yourself, do you want to go back and correct those flubs or not? But once you see yourself on video, at least now you become aware of some of your characteristics, and you become very aware that you're engaging in a performance art. I've always thought of lecturing as a very inspiring kind of performance art, one that I love to do, and one that I think can be made better by video lecturing. If you can take that hard look in the mirror and see what kinds of mistakes you make regularly, you have the chance to become a more effective performer, either live in the classroom or on video. The other thing I found is that I've shared my videos with some of my colleagues in psychology and in other parts of our college. And I was very fortunate to have a specialist in our own department in history and systems take a look at one of my videos and tell me that one of my, or in fact a few of my PowerPoint lecture notes were actually factually incorrect. I had taken them right out of a textbook that I had been using for many years, but the textbook is actually incorrect. I would never have known that, and most likely that colleague would never have been sitting in that classroom at that particular time. But with video lectures, colleagues can check in on each other and see what's going on in other classrooms, and we have this new opportunity for error correction to make us more effective performers, whether we're performing live in the classroom or whether we're performing on video. The other thing that I found with regard to faculty development is that the video lectures provide an excellent mechanism for metacognition. We can think of cognition as thinking, and we can think of metacognition as thinking about thinking. So what's cool about these video lectures is you get the chance to think about how you are as a lecturer in a brand new way. You get the opportunity to see what it's like to be a student in your own classroom, and this wouldn't be possible without video lectures. I think I've learned a lot about my own lecturing by watching myself across the entire course of the semester. So lots of opportunities and positives for faculty and students alike. There are, to be fair, lots of challenges as well. So here's our new road sign. We had seen our earlier road sign of opportunities. There are some challenges, and you'll come to this challenge, I think, most directly, and that is that creating video lectures is a huge time sink. There's a lot of time invested in capturing the lecture itself. Then there's time spent moving the large file from the video cam off to your computer. Then there's time spent in formatting that on your computer in a way that's ready to go up to YouTube. And then physically loading the file up to YouTube is actually quite time consuming. Then lastly, you have to connect the YouTube file to a Blackboard link. That's an enormously time consuming process. In addition to that, another possible challenge is maintaining enthusiasm on camera. And this leads me to an important social psychological phenomena called social facilitation. In social facilitation, what we find and what we observe is that people who are highly skilled, like you are at giving your lectures, actually perform best when they're in front of an audience. They perform suboptimally if they're in a room by themselves or with just a camera, performing that same act or that same lecture. So because you're an expert, you might be more effective at lecturing in front of an audience than you would be in front of a camera. By contrast, if you're a novice and you're put in front of an audience, we get social inhibition. You're actually worse in front of an audience than you would be in a silent room or in a room where there's just a camera. So it might be the case that I actually give suboptimal lectures on camera because of this social facilitation issue where we've taken the audience away. Okay? So it's very much like a transformation from being a live performer on a Broadway play versus being a studio performer inside of a cinema theater, or inside of a movie studio, I should say. Okay, so you come to this fork in the road and you say, well, given that it's a time sink, and given that maybe I'm going to be lecturing suboptimally for the camera relative to what I would do in the classroom, maybe I shouldn't go with video lectures. I certainly had those thoughts during this semester. On my first experience, I came to a couple of forks in the road. There was one particular fork in the road that I thought was very intriguing. And that was that a colleague of mine who also dabbles in video lecturing, had suggested that maybe I shouldn't put together all of my own videos. That's very time consuming. Maybe I should instead use canned videos. I mentioned earlier that there are these massive open online courses where there's a lot of information available by video and it's already done. So you could perhaps gain many of the benefits in video lecturing, not by creating your own lectures, but by simply pointing your students to pre-existing or canned lectures. And there might be some benefits to that. I have to confess that I myself prefer to be in this camp, the Grow Your Own camp, because there are some ideas that I've developed over these past 10 years that I'm so excited about, and I'm very particular about how they should be presented. I'll never find that stuff online. So I do choose to grow my own, even though it's a big time sink. But regardless of what you do when you come to this fork in the road and decide as to whether you would use a canned lecture or grow your own, you will have this problem, this challenge that I've struggled with. It's the problem of compliance. And here to help us with the issue of compliance is our old buddy, Javert from Les Mis, which appropriately is both a live theater performance, or has been performed on Broadway for many years, and also is recently a full-length movie, analogous to our performing live in the classroom or performing in the studio where you might be making your video lecture. Javert is always concerned with enforcement and compliance, and so am I. If I am going to spend all of this time creating this issue of, or creating a video lecture, I want to make sure my students watch it. So fortunately, there's some technology that can help us with that. If you do choose to upload your files to YouTube, YouTube will keep track of how many views there are. And so to help with compliance in video watching, as the students are walking into my classroom, I typically project the YouTube page that contains the video for that day. On this particular case, I have my form perception lecture, and it will say right over here how many views there have been. And if I have 20 students in my class, there better be at least 20 views as the students are walking in. And I congratulate my students for watching the videos when I look at this number. And when that number is lower than what it should be, I try to encourage them to engage in more video watching before coming in so that they can make the most of this rehearsal time. So YouTube has some statistics that will help us. This is one type of technology. A different type of technology is something that I use in the classroom. I have, to increase compliance, I have an Excel spreadsheet that contains all the student names. Next to each name, I have a random number. And I can change the random number by holding down the F9 key, and one of those numbers will turn out to be the highest at any given moment. And that person becomes the winner in my lottery, and I call on that person using my random number generator, and I'll say, okay, you're up, and this was one of the slides that we had in the video. Why don't you teach us about what's going on in this slide? So now in the classroom, I'm not teaching, the students are doing the teaching. We can have one student play teacher for all the rest. I sometimes will randomly generate an ensemble of students and then have them work one-on-one or in small groups as teacher, and the other students are learning. But they're always using my PowerPoint lecture notes. They're staying on topic, but they're lecturing to each other. They're teaching each other. They're learning by teaching, and that's turned out to be fairly effective. My random number generator has helped me achieve some level of compliance there. They know I'm going to be calling on them randomly, and that tends to work. Of course, you can always use pop quizzes as your fallback. I sometimes will give a pop quiz in class. I'll sometimes embed a pop quiz question in the video, and the students who have watched get rewarded for responding well to that. The students who have not watched the video are a bit at a loss when it comes to pop quiz time. Okay. Here's another challenge, and this is something that I hadn't anticipated, but one I thought I would share with you here. And that is, I wonder if I'm punting on reading. I haven't changed in any way my reading assignments. I've kept the reading assignments the same. My video lectures are in addition to, not instead of, the reading requirements. But I have a feeling that given limited amounts of time, if you give the student the opportunity to watch a video or to engage in reading, almost always the students will watch the video. And what I don't want to have happen is create an environment where I've somehow de-emphasize the importance of reading by giving them a video that basically contains most, if not all, of the information that they're going to need to be successful in the course. Reading at the college level is very, very important, and we get to do that by having the students practice and practice and practice. If we have video lectures where they can get the information, we run the risk of missing these learning opportunities for the important skill, the content-independent skill of reading. And that's, I think, a potential limitation associated with video lecturing. Okay. So those are some of the reflections that I had on my first experience with video lecturing. Of course, I was wondering when I'm reflecting on some of the pros and some of the cons, as this young boy is probably reflecting on, how am I doing? How did this work? So toward the end of the semester, I handed out an evaluation form where I asked students to think about what they had learned over the semester and what kinds of things we had done in the course that facilitated their learning. On a scale that goes from 0 to 10, with 10 being maximally effective learning and 0 being no learning at all, I asked them to rate various items. For example, how effective was the textbook? How effective were those PowerPoint lecture notes? How effective were the video lectures, the in-class demonstrations? I maintain an in-class activity list, which I'm happy to provide to you upon request if you want to see what kinds of things we do in the classroom to rehearse what we learned about in the videos. We have that. Primary research articles, student discussions, selected chapters from various books, writing assignments, exams. We had a few visiting speakers and so forth. And on a scale that went from 0 to 10, you can see that we got a little bit past 9 with the video lectures. In fact, that was the #1 most effective item according to the students' self-report. In fact, this was statistically greater than each of the other items, with the exception of the PowerPoint lecture notes, which were used in tandem with the video lectures. The students also offered some qualitative feedback, and they frequently generated, without my prompting them, words like, the videos were foundational. They were stimulating, they provided a base that helped me prepare for an exam, or helped me prepare for the rehearsal that we would do in the classroom. So looking back over the semester, I think it was really an exciting opportunity for me. I'm even more excited about additional video lectures for my upcoming classes next semester and in future semesters. And I thank you for your interest in flipping the classroom with video lectures.